They are now in fully fledged anxiety. In that transaction, my parents were naive and they got into trouble in terms of the legal agreements that they had made and were held responsible for something. I was probably unemployable by that time. I was uneducated, so I hadn't been to university, I didn't have an MBA, I hadn't had any corporate experience. Everything I did was through what I'd learnt. I think it was more because I was something that had been absorbed in and they wanted me out. It was an opportunity for us to put everything we had learned over the last 20 years into place, and we completely disrupted the flexible office market.
Hi, today I'm with Niki from Office Space in Town. Hello, Niki.
Hello.
Hello, thank you for joining us. And today we are in one of your centres.
We are in our oldest centre in Northampton.
And what is Office Space in Town?
Oh, goodness gracious. So it's a company. It is a family-owned business. My brother and I and Sarah Singlehurst established it in 2009. It is a serviced office business, which in simple terms is a hotel for businesses. Instead of beds, you get desks, you get receptionists on the front desk to meet and greet your clients, and instead of a bathroom, you get internet, telephony, you get meeting rooms, you get phone booths, you get kitchens, you get communal areas to sit with your colleagues. So it's an all-encompassing business environment. That's what a serviced office is. It's also known now as co-working space, and it has it's grown rapidly in the last 5 years since a company called WeWork came and disrupted the industry. And of course, the pandemic has really brought it into its own. But it's been around since my mother formed the first one in Northampton in this building in 1979.
I was going to ask that because I've heard a rumour that your family are sort of groundbreakers in the sort of serviced office space.
They were. So my father was a business consultant and worked for an American firm. He came back from one of his many travels to the US and said to my mother, there's this amazing concept called business centres, as they were known then, where they provide an office and a secretary and a telephone, and business executives can set up their new businesses, and I think we should do it. And they'd inherited this building from my grandfather, and it needed too much work doing. It was falling down around their ears. They didn't have any money, so they found the best rooms that didn't have mold crawling out of the corner. They put my mother in the reception area. She had a bank of 10 telephones, and she started selling the offices to executives, and it just took off. Who would know, back in 1979?
I find that fascinating because you'd always assume, well, I would, and I imagine some others would, that London or the big cities are the places where these sort of innovations in industry would happen. But as you just said, we are sat in the building that started that trend, which leads on to, as you said, a booming industry with companies like WeWork you just mentioned, though, are sort of commonplace.
Oh, well, I think, back in 1979, the regions were far stronger in terms of businesses, and not everything was centralised around London or Birmingham or Manchester. So, business executives worked locally in local firms. commuting wasn't really a thing. You know, they commuted into their local town or their local city. They didn't travel.
You lived where you were.
You lived where you worked. And so when these people wanted to set up their own business, and of course, recessions mean that senior executives go out and set up their own businesses as they're made redundant. And, you know, going back to the late 70s and recessions we've had since then, you can see that repeating time over time. So we were perfectly placed to provide that space. And it had never been done before. These people had never got a place to go where they could start up a business. So an office like this, which we're in now, we would currently rent this as a 5-person office. Back in 1979, this was a 1-person office. They would sit here with
giant desk
and their giant chair and their filing cabinets. And yes, it's very different now.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, it was all about the managing director's desk and how grand it was and how big the chair was. And I think now in our office, everybody has the same chair.
Well, they do, but we have a thing which we call a boss desk. So when we lay a room out, we try and always put one desk on its own. It's the same size as everybody else, has the same chair, but it's just one desk that sits on its own, just in case somebody still feels that they should be noticed when you go into the office.
And you touched on it a moment ago, sort of as this sort of industry that you're in has sort of really sort of come on leaps and bounds over the sort of last few years. One of the things that everybody's still talking about currently is hybrid working, and businesses are moving out of the big buildings they used to have, especially larger corporates, and people are sort of like hot desking more or working more from home. And I'd like to say I coined a phrase, sort of a micro business economy, where a lot of the makeup of businesses these days are more micro, small consultant type businesses compared to being more larger corporates they were before. The banks we work with, a lot of their staff are contracts, for example. Do you see that continuing? I ask because I've read a piece that you wrote about the evolution of hybrid working and community effectively with it, when you don't have that community gelling together with your colleagues when you're working from home.
God, there was a lot in there. I don't know quite where to start. If I can break it down in my head so I don't lose track. So what's hybrid working? How do I see the future of the workplace maybe? And also culture. I think they were, if I was going to break it down. So hybrid working means different things to different people. About 5 years ago, there was a forecast that 50% of the population would be digital nomads by 2040, 2030. The pandemic has speeded up the whole process of change that was being seen and discussed, and is it or isn't it really going to happen? So hybrid working is very different for lots of different people. Some businesses, hybrid working means everybody works from home and we don't have a centralized office. Everything is online, and there are many companies, I understand, in America that have been working like that for some time, and they have found a way to build culture, and their employees are people that all want to work that way, and their businesses generally are technology based. So it works well. The individuals understand what's needed to have that culture. The other extreme, you've got lawyers or accountants, training companies, manufacturing companies, where hybrid working, some people working from home just is really challenging. And they've got teams that need to be in the office. Creative teams, they need some time away from the office that they've found works really well for them to be creative. But to drive projects forward, actually being in the same place and gelling as a team makes them more productive. And so going back to your question, what is hybrid working? I think it's something that's different for everybody else. I think a lot of companies have claimed to have nailed it, the 4-day week, we're productive. But for me, instinctively, I think a lot of people will have made a lot of mistakes by nailing their colours to the mast, is that the saying, very early on, and perhaps not really understanding the long-term impacts to individuals. I spoke to somebody close to me, I won't say in what respect, and their partner had been remote working since the beginning of the pandemic, and the company had fluctuated in their plans, and they said, well, you're going to work from home, and then last year, no, you're going to come back in 1 day a month, so they all started coming in back 1 day a month, and then now you're going to come back 1 day a week. And this person had really engaged with the remote working. Initially, they had loved it. It fitted their life plan. They thought it gave them a big work-life balance. They are now in fully fledged anxiety because they are looking at the same 4 walls 4 days a week, and
this is working from home, or this is back in the office?
Working from home 4 days a week, in the office 1 day a week. And this is somebody who had fully engaged and said it's the best thing in the world. But 2.5, 3 years on, those things that they thought were good for them have actually damaged them.
See, I can relate to that personally. I have got to the point personally now where I really dislike working from home. And I like being in the office because I'm somebody who likes to walk the office, be around the team, have these conversations where ideas are born and innovation is made, compared to being at home effectively alone, just staring at the same 4 walls. And also, for me personally, you lose, and I said it earlier, the community aspect of being within a team, because if you're sat there and you just watch a film or Dragons, whatever's been on TV recently, and then you'll go into the office next day and say, oh, did you see? And you'll just spark that conversation with a colleague. You won't start up a Zoom call or something, or Teams call to a colleague to have that sort of conversation. So you cut out all that natural conversation you'd normally build up with your colleague.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult, and you can't, we could talk about this for hours on end, but the depth of your life, the content in your life becomes smaller when you are restricted to a space. And everybody's situation changes. You might be in a house share, you might be in a relationship, and so you have more content coming to your life from that person. But then you might lose that environment and become very isolated. Or you might suddenly look at this person and go, they have far more content to my life, to their life, than I do. And we're human, we become jealous. So for me, trying to bring it back to hybrid working, I think there are lots of different scenarios. I think a company can say, this is what works for us. And today it works for the teams that you have. But your team is not fixed, it's not set, and their situation and the situations are not fixed and are not set. And you will churn your staff, and your business will change and develop and grow. And so whatever your decisions today, I don't think they will necessarily be the right decisions for your business next week, next month, next year. And so flexibility and in all areas of your business now through hybrid working is paramount. And I'm not sure that doesn't put such pressure on a business to take responsibility for so much of in terms of the individuals. And as humans, we know what we want, but we don't actually always know what's good for us. And so I think perhaps businesses need to decide what's good for their employees and try and educate them as to why that's good for them. And that might not actually be what they want.
Interesting.
Is that?
No, that's really interesting. No, that's a very, and a lot of that I can relate to within our own business and my own personal sort of working environment. And it's what we see a lot of conversation about within the UK Business Forums community itself, because so many business owners, particularly small business owners that make up UKBF, are going through these same questions and uncertainty about, impact on my business, impact on my staff, dealing with these sort of, and dealing with mental health issues for the staff, which are things that are surfacing now that didn't surface 15, 20 years ago. So it's a very different environment.
It is. And, without, the other side of the coin is, if you don't utilise office space wherever you live, what are the unintended consequences of that? And without being too, so small businesses, convenience stores, restaurants, coffee shops, all of those things, all of those companies find it harder. They're not going to be there if you don't use them, or there will be less of them. Now, that might be right. There may be far too many, because we've all been splashing the cash because life has been so great for the last 15, 20 years. We all know life is getting harder at the moment. We've all got less money. So not going to the office impacts all of those smaller businesses that provide services to the offices. Who owns those office buildings? Pension funds. Massive companies. So there are the unintended consequences of making decisions about where we want to work that we think just goes down to the business that we're working for. And they're like, well, if they don't have to pay to an office, they can pay me more money. I don't have to go into the office. I can be at home. But actually, where's your pension coming from? Where do the big corporates invest their money? They invest it on the stock market. It's all connected.
It's a tangled web.
It is a really, really tangled web. And, just because it's good for me today, you need to be, I think, slightly more considered about your decisions.
Okay. I'd like to talk about your personal journey now, how you came to be running office space in town as you are now, because it wasn't a straight line, if I say so.
Well, sadly, unlike you, I don't have incredible skills in technology, and I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur either. I have been given opportunities and had to follow through in areas that I never expected to. So how did I get here? So my mother and father, as I said at the beginning, converted this business this building in 1979 into what was called a business centre. They grew the business and they took leases on buildings, and their final one they opened in Leicester, Bedford. They opened another one in Northampton, and then they opened one in Coventry, and that caused them a few problems, put the company at risk. So they sold the business to.
When you say cause a few problems, is this overstretching?
Yeah, they got overstretched, and the Coventry Council had an incubation centre where they were meant to take start-up businesses for 2 years and then release them. But because they hit the recession, they didn't want to release them, and so our centre in Coventry didn't get the clients coming through. Anyway, overstretched. Coventry is a different place now. It's a thriving, thriving city. So the business was sold. How did I end up to it? So my mother went to work for the new owners. They decided actually they wanted to focus on covered markets. So my mother and father bought back the business, and in that transaction, my parents were naive, and they got into trouble in terms of the legal agreements that they had made, and were held responsible for something that they were advised to do by their legal advisors, and so they had to step down as directors. You can't fight the DTI. And I was working in the business. There was an MD and an FD. And so my parents stepped down and I was operations director. And the MD at the time didn't feel that he didn't want to take on the responsibility. He wanted the security of something else. So he took one of our new contracts that was in the pipeline and went to work for that business, which left me at 25 with my FD running 12 centres around the UK.
That's quite a substantial operation for such a young age.
It was, and I didn't really know anything about anything. I knew how to read a P&L, just about. I knew how to chase debtors. I knew how to run a building because that's what I'd been doing. But I didn't know anything about business at all. And I was good with people. That was all I really had at that time. And then in the September of that year, so that all happened in the January, February, March, and then in the September, my FD died, sadly, of cancer. So I was left all alone. That's all I can say. And I got through it. I had amazing people around me. Life wasn't as complicated then as it is now. And I soon realised that running a business which was based across the UK was not possible with the structure that I had. You know, you need area managers and you need this, and, and actually you've got to keep your business close to you. Somebody said to me, if you can't get to members of your team within an hour, then they're too far away. And that's slightly different now with transport and everything, but it was too much. So I looked at the business, and taking leases was too risky. We didn't have any leases by that point. I closed some centres that we had leases, got rid of all of those, and did management contracts. We were the first company to do management contracts in the UK. Now, as of today, nearly every operator is chasing a management contract rather than a lease.
And what's the difference between lease management contract? How does that change the way?
So there are three types of model in our industry. So there's own your own buildings, which is what we now do. We own our own buildings. There is taking a lease. So when you want to put your company in a building, you generally sign a legal agreement for 5 years or 10 years. That's what a lease is. And you're committed, and it has rent reviews every 5 years that generally only go upwards. I don't think they ever go downwards. And you're responsible for certain parts of maintaining the building. And then in our business, a management agreement is where you have somebody who owns the building. They see the value of having a serviced office or a flex space product in their building, but they don't have the infrastructure to run it themselves. So they get a company, a management company, to come in and manage their space on their behalf. And they may bring their own brand with them and their own staff. It may be based on a fixed fee. It might be based on a peppercorn rent, which is like a small level of income, and then they share the profit above that. So there's lots of different ways, but it's low risk to the operator. Yeah. A lease is high risk.
I can see why when you say everybody's chasing the management contracts, then why that's different.
So you had a pandemic where operators who had leases had no or little income, but they still had a lease liability. Yeah. So they then were reliant on the landlord to give them rent-free or push their lease out. If you're on a management agreement, both you and the landlord are in it together, and so the landlord knows you need to survive, so it's much easier to find an agreement. Or as we are, we own our building, so we're beholden to nobody except the bank, obviously. So our risk is very, very low.
So at the age of 25, you got through that year, learned a hell of a lot, I imagine, a sort of baptism of fire, and then you started to consolidate the business.
Yes.
What happened next?
Well, a lot of it I've blanked out my mind. I can't even remember what I learned and how I learned it. But I knew that I couldn't take leases. They were too expensive and they put me at risk when the economy failed. I still had to pay my rent. So I had to find a way forward. So I came up with the management concept. So how do you grow a business? You need landlords. I didn't have any money. That was the other problem. The business had very little money. So I needed to find a way to grow.
You've just skipped over something really quickly then. You said you came up with a management concept, and we've just had a conversation about what management concept is.
Yes.
So have you just completely skimmed over that you created that concept that's now widely used in the industry?
Okay, so where did that come from? I think the management concept came out of failing leases. So during this time when I took over the business and was trying to climb out of the hole that I was, trying to learn, I was having to negotiate with landlords who I had leases with, who I couldn't afford to pay the rent to. And they weren't going to find new tenants, so they didn't really want empty buildings. So we had to find something that worked for them and that worked for me. And so this concept of a management agreement came out of those negotiations. And whilst I was trying to find ways of how do you grow a business with no money, bearing in mind the business I was in, it was all I knew, and I couldn't afford to let it go, because once you have something and it's your only way forward, you're like, I can't let this go. So the management agreement concept seemed like a really good idea. It was a win-win. I didn't have to put money in. My investment into the deal was my knowledge, and the landlord's investment was their building. And they got money out, they got tenants and income, and they got their building looked after, and the profile of the building improved. And so if at some point they did want to sell it, it would be far more valuable, and I got an income. So it's a win-win. Why would nobody want to do that? And I could see lots of, in my mind, of course, why wouldn't anyone want to do it? There'll be hundreds of people who want to do it. So I decided with my new FD to do a business plan, wrote a letter, and bought a database, and sat in my garden with my husband, putting lots of these into envelopes. I think we must have sent out about 3,000 across the United Kingdom. 3,000. This was when, mail shots were the way to go. There was there was the internet. That's a different story.
With the whole beep, 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 beep.
And I think, again, I was really young and naive and I didn't know anything, and my FD was okay, but he wasn't a personality, and so he was not the wingman that I needed. But between us, we did the best that we could. At this point, my brother had sold his business, and he was like, let me come and help you. And I was like, yes, please, come and help me. So all that ended up with us negotiating with a company called Quintain Estates and Development, who were a very dynamic, entrepreneurial property company. And they were like, yep, we like the idea. A very charismatic CEO. And we fell in love with them. And I think they fell in love with us. And they were like, yep, we'll here's some cash, but you need to pay your staff more. You're need to buy them cars, you need to do that. And I was like, what did I know? I was like, well, if you're the people that made loads of money, I should follow your instructions. So I did all of that. And they said, look, we'll buy buildings and we'll do management agreements with you.
Sounds fine.
It was brilliant. I was like, how can this go wrong? So this was in 1999, I think. And they never bought any buildings. And, we got a couple of management agreements that we negotiated, but it was a lot harder to find them than I thought it was going to be. And
your overheads were massive as well.
I'd spent money where I didn't need to because I'd followed their instructions. And what did I know? So I learnt more, I think, in this period of time than I had anywhere else, because I learnt what not to do. And I also learnt that just because other people are successful doesn't mean they do it right and they have all the answers. But my brother and I learnt a lot. We had a great FD by that point as well. And we decided that we needed to find some new shareholders. And so that required us to be slightly, what's the word? I'm not sure. So we went...
Strategic?
Strategic, yes. So they didn't believe that we would do what we said we were going to do. And so we went into pre-packed administration and we came out the other side with new shareholders.
And I've got a note, it sold to MWB in 2005. So this is
the end of Quintain. That was what we did. So we sold to MWB. So Quintain were out, MWB were in. And they were a very successful serviced office company by that time.
And how was that period with MWB? What was different then?
Well, I was probably unemployable by that time. I was uneducated, so I hadn't been to university, I didn't have an MBA, I hadn't had any corporate experience. Everything I did was through what I'd learnt from talking to other people, I had learnt through making mistakes, and I was thrown into a corporate environment. My brother became a consultant, he went off and did other things. I stayed in the business for a year and then we parted ways.
Just picking up on the comment unemployable, this is something that I hear a lot of when I speak to people who have run their own businesses for a while or are currently running their own businesses. They say they're unemployable. Why would you say you're unemployable? Well, you were unemployable.
Well, I can't answer for other people saying whether they were unemployable. I think I was an MD of a business, and so I was responsible for all of those things. But when you put an MD of a small business, where they're responsible for everything, into a larger business where their responsibility is restricted, and also they have had a business with its own culture, and they're then put into a different business with a different culture, and they're not able to influence that. There are so many things that just grate continuously, and it's frustrating. And also you're not as, you know what you know, but you don't really know what you don't know. And larger corporations have worked all those things out, and they have, this is my experience, they have more systems in place, and they have a bigger marketing department, and they have better understandings of things. And so it just didn't work. But for me also was the biggest, I was also, apart from the HR director, I was the only female senior management, female in the senior management team. And I definitely wasn't in the senior management team.
Interesting. The two things now, because I had another question, you've just popped another one in. So the first one, when you, it's quite common when people sell businesses. So you've gone through the process of selling a business, and it's the entrepreneur, the business founder, the person who's selling will always generally be there for a short period of time during the transition, and then they're out. And sometimes that's by mutual agreement, sometimes it's by pushing, sometimes they just want to get out.
Yeah.
The theory is that large corporates are running a process, and it's that process. And that's what I'm picking up from what you're saying is when you're a dynamic business founder who's used to just being able to just control the ship, not necessarily, I'm not saying control it dictatorial, but literally you can make a difference.
Yes, you choose the direction of the ship. Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Is my question.
Oh, absolutely. I don't blame anyone in the business as to why it didn't work for me being in it, and I think that's exactly why you become kind of unemployable, because as an entrepreneur, you have a vision and you want to drive the business there, and you can't do that.
The bit that just popped into my head is you said just there, you was part of the senior team, the only woman was part of the senior team, but you didn't feel that you was part of the senior team.
But the HR director was, and she was very definitely part of the senior management team, and she was very influential. And I said that, and then I thought, I don't want that to be misconstrued. I think it was more because I was something that had been absorbed in, and they wanted me out. And as part of the purchase, they had not negotiated a fixed term, it was an open. So they wanted me out. Right. And rather than have a conversation with me, they just made it really difficult and obvious. And so we all got to the right place in the end. And I think an HR director role historically was probably the first senior female roles that there were. I think operationally, definitely in property, it was more of a man's thing, but I never felt that it was because I was a woman. And that wouldn't have bothered me anyway. That wouldn't have stopped me fighting for it.
So you came out of there.
Yay!
And tell me about Offices, Please.
Oh, pink offices, please. So the co-founder of Office Space in Town with Giles and myself is Sarah Singlehurst. And Sarah and I had worked together at City Executive Centres. So when I left MWB, we were like, wow, let's go be agents. Let's go do it from the other side. How hard can it be? And she is the most dynamic individual you'll ever meet. She is a sphere of energy and a saleswoman, an extraordinary saleswoman. She is currently our sales director in Office Space in Town, as well as co-founder. So we're like, what are we going to do? Let's set up an agency. Offices, please. We're women, so we thought we'd go pink and black. It's an online business. It's about people. And so we set that up in 2007. And we had a wonderful SEO advisor called Alfred Eccles, who we're currently working with again now, which is so exciting. He was incredible. And so our website, we didn't pay for any advertising like our competitors. Everything we got was organic search. So it was really low cost. It was the cost of the website. And we sit and wrote content in our evenings instead of watching Coronation Street. And Sarah was an amazing saleswoman, and I'm a process-driven person. I was, or I thought I was, but I knew I had to follow a process. And so we sold serviced offices to companies that wanted flexible office space. And it was great, and was just reaching the peak. And we had an amazing investor as well who put a lot of money into it, Richard Sunley, and he was a huge supporter of us right up until the very end. And then the financial crisis hit. And we got struck down. I'd never heard of groupthink. Have you heard of groupthink?
No.
So it was like everybody stopped searching for office space on the internet on the same day. It just disappeared overnight. And we were too small and too reliant on organic search to keep going. And so in 2009, we closed the business.
But you still had household support built.
Yes.
Made.
We both, Sarah has 2 daughters. She was a single mum. I had my husband. Obviously, he did work as well. And we had our young son. And so Sarah and I started cleaning offices.
Yeah. You do what...
I ruined my hands. They're still suffering.
But that's a sheer determination. You literally, sort of strength of character is that somebody who, does what you do, you take a hit, but you do whatever it takes.
We had to. We had debts to pay. We had mortgages to pay. You can't be choosy. And you have to find a way to pay the bills. There's always, I think, if you're fit, you can knock on a door. You don't have to have office skills, and you just have to be polite. You have to be able to communicate and be prepared to do anything. You can find a job. Yeah. Find several jobs if you can't find one job that provides you with enough. And so that's what we did. Yeah. Waited for something else to come along, an opportunity, an idea.
And what did come along?
Oh, my brother! My brother is amazing. I'm his biggest fan. Make me cry thinking about him, really. So he had been doing some property investment. And my brain and my memory is a bit fuddled, so I'm not sure which way things go, which exact order. But he came to Sarah and I and said, I've been approached to run a serviced office in Hemel Hempstead that's in receivership. So to run it for the receivers until they can sell it. And they've come to us, we were the biggest management company, that's what we did. Do you two fancy doing it? And Sarah like, oh, yes, please. We'll be there tomorrow. So Sarah and I went into Hemel Hempstead and we took over this failing serviced office to manage on behalf of the receivers. And then they needed another one in Aylesbury. So we started doing that as well. By this time, our warranties with MWB had fallen away, so we could re-enter the market. So that had been a stopper as well. And Giles had decided, management agreements were a great idea, but really, we need to go back. We need to own our buildings. So he came up with a 20-year plan. We'll do 10 management deals, which will give us enough income to buy 1 building. And so over 20 years, we'd get to own 10 buildings. This was his plan. And he got us a management contract at Euston Tower. And we opened that in May 2009 as office space in town. And that was the beginning of where we are today. I
love the fact you mention that, and the amount of times I travel to Euston and see Euston Tower, and that I'm sitting with the lady whose company has managed that building, is phenomenal.
Well, that's very sweet of you. We had the top 3 floors. They had the best views over London, and it was an opportunity for us to put everything we had learned over the last 20 years into place, and we completely disrupted the flexible office market with that when we opened in Euston. We turned it upside down. Nobody had done it. It was absolutely cutting edge. It was very exciting.
And that, I think, does that bring us to office space in town?
So that brings us really to office space in town, and then our growth out of Euston Tower, and yes, brings us up to office space in town, 2009.
And I feel that there's a little bit of a spoiler in what you just said a moment ago for the next question, but I'll ask it anyway, is where is office space in town going? What is the future?
Future is orange, apparently. Our strategy is still to buy buildings. So we opened Euston in 2009, and then Giles, through his networking, his connections, and our reputation as individuals, he raised finance with a fund called Forum Partners, and we bought 4 buildings with them. That was our Liverpool Street building, which we opened in 2015, and then St Paul's in 2016, Waterloo, and then Monument.
So quite significant locations.
Yeah, very significant. And you go to our website if you want to go and see what they look like. I won't take up your time talking about it, but they are stunning buildings. And going back to what we said about Euston, we put in so much breakout space. So for clients to step out of their offices, to be able to roam the building with internet, so they could be completely mobile in our office environment. Beautiful kitchens, free tea and coffee, table tennis tables, chess boards, pool, free meeting rooms, little beanbag rooms. It hadn't been done before, and we did it. And then every new building we opened just grew that concept. And each one, rather than being a corporate environment like our competitors, where every building was fitted out exactly the same, we designed our space to reflect the local business environment that we were in. So each of our buildings is different. And so we grew, and we now have those 4 locations. We have one in Blackfriars as well, which is the Happiness Building. That's our most recent building.
So the Happiness Building.
The Happiness Building.
Why is it the Happiness Building?
It was designed around the concepts that made all of us in the business smile. So there are a lot of pets, not real ones. There is poetry. There is a giant smiling Smartie. There's a hot air balloon. There are giant giraffes and butterflies. There's vibrant colours.
I'm wanting to visit.
There's a Lego room.
Now I definitely want to visit.
That's why it's the Happiness Building. Everything in there is somebody's idea, something that makes somebody happy. It's very random but beautiful.
Jacob, we're going to Blackfriars.
Feel free. Come and experience it.
I'm picking up very clear from there that these are London locations.
They are. So you wanted to know what our strategy was. So we are London-centric. Yeah. Got to be within a 5-minute walk of a main transport hub. We want to buy buildings. That is our strategy, has been our strategy and continues to be our strategy. we are and have always been open to doing management contracts for businesses, landlords that appreciate the value of flexible office space. So we're very open to doing that. And this year, in fact, we bought out the shareholder of those 4 original. We've churned a few times, but our last shareholder, we just structured a deal and have bought them out. So we are now hugely in debt, but own our own buildings. Going into a recession.
I was going to say, how does that must be exhilarating, but also nerve-wracking.
Exhilarating and terrifying in equal measures. But you know what? Opportunities come but once in a lifetime, I think somebody said, and I should probably know who that is. And if it comes your way, you have to take it, because there is nothing worse than looking back and regretting an opportunity not taken. I would much rather look back and go, that was awful, that was horrendous, but we all lived to fight another day, than look back and go, I wish I'd done that.
In the happiness building, what was your contribution?
I had a life coach a few years ago, an amazing woman, and she said to me, when somebody says to you, what do you do? People always answer, oh, I'm an MD, or I'm an SEO, whatever it is that you do. I'm an accountant. And she said, you know, is that what you do? Does your job define you? Is that who you are? And I thought about it, and I was like, oh my God. You know, that is not who I am, and I don't go to work to be an MD. And so she made me think about it and go, so, you know, what is it that you do? And so my answer now when people say, what do you do? Is I make people smile and I make people happy, because I think that is my purpose. So going back to your question about what was my input to the happiness building, it was a poem by Spike Milligan, which actually my mother had recently reminded me of. And if I can just read the first bit. Smile by Spike Milligan. Smiling is infectious. You catch it like the flu. When someone smiled at me today, I started smiling too. And I think that's kind of how I live my life. And that is how I try and engage with everybody that I engage with.
That is a fantastic note to end on. But I have to ask one more question, because it's a tradition of what we ask at the end of it. And I feel like that is such a closing, like, fantastic statement. But I think I know the answer now as well. How would you like to be remembered?
As the person that made people happy.
Yeah, I pick up that vibe. That's fantastic. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for putting me in the box with all those amazing people that you've interviewed to date.
You underestimate, or you're underselling yourself here. It's a brilliant story. It's fascinating hearing how you got to where you are. Fascinating that you've shaped the industry you work within, and you make people smile. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your time.